Welcome CSE 235 W1 to our Node intro. This will be ex10. So we're going to get started with Node first, and then we're going to get into Express just a little bit. And again, it'll just be a taste. It'll be an introduction because, first of all, it takes a lot of time to learn Node and work with Node. And also, you don't know if you're going to be working with Node. The good thing is it's nice to be aware of it and know how it works and be somewhat fluent in its language, just in case you ever have an interview that relates to Node or someone asks you about Node. The more you know about some of these frameworks and technologies, the better. Even if it's something you haven't really dove really deep into yet, it's good to have a little bit of an overview. And that's all I'm giving you now. And again, I have a background in HTML, CSS, JavaScript. I learned JavaScript somewhat back when I was learning ActionScript with Flash. So that goes back a little while, but I don't know everything about JavaScript. And some of these new frameworks like Bootstrap on the front end, Flask, Node, all these things are somewhat new to me, so I'm learning just like you, and I'm trying to find if it'd be something that would be worth it or not, based on what I know, based on other technologies. So we're just giving you a little taste here, and I'm trying to find people who really explain it well. And one of the people who explains it very well is this guy, Brad Schiff, of Learn Web Code, even more than some of the other ones we looked at, even more than Traversy and even Corey Schaefer. He really breaks things down into very simple concepts in the beginning, so I like the way he presents things for beginners. If you're more advanced, you may like some other people on YouTube. There's a lot of great people on YouTube to watch, but Brad is a good one for beginning, so I'm going to follow what he's doing a little bit. I'm not going to do everything he's doing. I'm going to do it in Replit. He's not using Replit. He's using VS Code. And I'll just kind of go over some concepts and kind of vary off of what he's doing a little bit. But you can watch this or watch the beginning just to get the introduction of Node and get his explanation of Node, because Node itself, Node.js, is just JavaScript. It's kind of bare bones JavaScript that doesn't really need to run in a browser. And also, it's not the web server version yet either. We're going to have to use Express for that, the Express framework. So right now, it's just like any other programming language. It's almost like Python. Some of the things we could do, read files and write files and require modules and import, those are things that you've done in Programming 1 with Python. So that's kind of what Node does in the beginning. So we'll just have a little bit of an intro to that, but you're not going to use regular Node for a lot of things. At least at this point, you don't know you are. And if you're looking into web development, you're probably going to want to learn more Express, which is a little bit like Flask in some ways in the way it sets up templates. So let's get started, watch a little bit of this, and I'll get you started in Replit. So what you're going to do in Replit is create a new REPL. So let's create a new REPL. And luckily, you can go and find a Node.js template to work with. So you don't have to install it. In his video, he installs it and you could work with it on your hard drive at home, but we're just going to use this in Replit. So if you search for Node, you'll see a couple things. Node prybar, you might even see it with Express, but right now just regular Node.js in Replit is fine. So we're going to do that. So just click on Node.js and just call it 10. You could put ex10 or 10. And I'm just going to call it Node Intro, and I'll put my initials, and that's all I'm going to do right now. And I'll create my REPL. Okay, so what you'll see first, you might see this package.json file. You could look at it and see what's in there, and it'll also include some of the installs that you do, but right now it's almost like a Python library somewhat, where it's kind of a key value system. And you don't have to worry about that right now, but that's installed with that. So we do have an index.js. That's kind of our home JS, but notice we're not working with an HTML file right now. So we're just going to run things right out in the console. And you'll see results in the console, or we could work in the shell, which is the terminal, where we can actually give it some commands. So the first thing I'll do, without anything in here, nothing in here, no index.js file, and this is what Brad does in his videos, he just goes here and in your root, in your shell. Again, if you don't see this, make sure that you show this. You could use these dots over here, or if this is gone for whatever reason and you just have a console, you could go here and just type in shell and start your shell here. So your shell will always look like this. This is kind of like your bash commands that you might do, like Linux commands are like this. So we're going to work in our terminal. In Mac, you have a terminal. In Windows, you have PowerShell, and we're just going to give some kind of root command line commands here. So the first thing you could do is just type in node space and then -v. That's just asking for the version of Node. And notice you use this node command first and then hit enter. and it's telling you it's version 20.3.1. So you don't have to install it. In his video, he's installing it. So you don't have to install it. That's what's installed in here in Replit. So that's the version here. And then what you can also do is kind of run things in here. Now, the best way to run things is actually to run code right here instead of just running things right here. Like you could do this. You could go Node and hit enter. And then you basically enter this kind of interpreter. And we've done this in Python, we've done this in MySQL, and you could type JS code or JavaScript code right here and get results. But you don't really want to do that. It's not really a great area to do that. It's easier to write code over here and then actually run the file in here. So I'm going to exit out of this by using .exit. And that'll get out of just the interpreter. We'll still be in the shell, but that just gets out of the Node interpreter. And again, that's kind of like Python interpreter that you could do, but we don't even do that much either. We do the same thing where we actually create a Python file, and then you could run it from the terminal, but in Replit, you don't have to do that. In Replit, you could just hit run, and then it shows up, your results show up in the console. So if you were on your hard drive and you weren't in something like Replit, you could basically run things, right out of your terminal. So let's just look at something, for example, first. I'm just going to go to index, and I'll just write a simple function. And I'll create a function called square num, and I'll use camel case. And what do you think this is going to do? We'll put that in here. Basically, whatever you put in here is going to return something. Now, it's giving me the code here, so I'm not even going to do this right now. What I'm going to do is just put an X, so whatever number we put in here, and we're just going to return something. We'll just say return, and to square a number, you put something in here, and then you do what? You do X times X. So that's basically a function that's going to return whatever number you put in here. So then you could do this. You could go console log, just like we normally do, console.log, and you can run the function, and I'll just put square num, and I'll send it an argument. Remember, this is the parameter, and the argument is what you put in there. So the variable that you have in there for a function that you have to throw in there is the parameter. The argument is what you're actually going to throw in there. So that's actually what you're putting in there. Just like when you're having an argument, that's basically your opinion you're throwing in there. So we're putting something in there. So if we put in 2, it should be 2 times 2 equals 4. So let's just put in 2 since that's showing up there already. And what you could do, because we have index.js, before we just hit run, if we hit run, it should basically display it in the console. But even if you were running it off of your hard drive or running it in here in the terminal, you could basically say node space and then run the file index. Now, you don't even have to put index.js. It's like when you're using Python files, you don't always have to put the extension. You can, but you could just do index. And what it should do is it should run this file if we have things correct here, which I think we do. And it says 4. So whatever number you put in here, 4, that would be 16, you could put node, and then you're running the file. So this is running the file from the terminal. We've done that before with other programming languages with Python. So we're running the file from the terminal. Now, we don't have to do that because we could do it right in Replit, but I just want to show you that we could do that. And you can also use VS Code and run it off your hard drive that way too. So that's one way to actually run a file. And again, we do that with MySQL files to actually get database information back when we work in Python anywhere. But that's one way to do it. So that's running the file through the terminal. Now you could just go to the console here and you could just hit run, and it'll output your data there too. So that's certainly an easier way to do that, but it's good to be familiar with the shell and see how things work in there, because you may do installs in here in the shell. You may install Express from the npm, and I mentioned npm because he mentions npm, which is the Node package manager. That's the way you can install different frameworks that work with Node, and he goes over that in the Express video and stuff, but I just want to mention that there. And again, you could read and write files. We're not going to do all that. We're just going to do a couple things here. One thing I want to mention, I didn't mention this before. So another type of function syntax I want to show you here is called an arrow function. And it basically takes a standard function like this, where we have the function keyword, we have the function name, we have a parameter where we're going to put something in there, and we have a return statement. And then down here, this is our argument we put in 4. So a shortcut to doing it this way, it's really just a simpler syntax, is by doing something like this, where you can declare a variable for the function and just call it square num. And I'll call it square num2 because it's something different. I don't want the same one. And then you can just put equals, and it's coming up here, and in parentheses we'll still put our parameter of x. Then we use this arrow feature. It looks like a equal sign and a greater than sign, and then we don't need any curly braces here. We could just go here and put x times x, and I'll space it out just so it looks nice. So it's basically taking this and putting it on one line here, and there shouldn't be a space here, so it should look like this. That's what it should look like, and it's really just a shorthand version of doing that. So it's creating kind of a local variable here, and then it's returning this. So I'm going to just show an example here of a second time of doing it, and we can run out two different logs here in our shell or in our console, and I'll put a different number in here. I'll put like 8 in here, so that should be 64. So our argument here is going to be 8, our argument here is going to be 4, and this is using square num, this is using square num 2, so I got to change this here. So we have two functions here, and let's run it. And in our console, we're coming with 16 and 4. If we ran it in our shell, we could use node index, just like we were doing, and hit enter, and it should show up there. And that's really kind of an arrow function. It's really just a shorthand. So if you see that, that's what that is. It's just another way of returning what's going to happen here in the curly braces. So it's just a little bit shorter of doing that. And sometimes I like to do both ways just because it helps me understand it a little bit better, because I haven't used arrow functions for a long time. Now, one other thing I could do here is let's just make it a little more usable. I'll put cube num. And down here, I'll do cube num. So we're not just putting different numbers in. We're doing a different kind of function here. I'm going to do cube num. Now, this time, this would be times x. It would be 3 times. So it would take the number times the number times the number. That would be cubing. So just to try it out, I'll leave 4 in there, which would come out to 16. And if you cube a number, 3 is an easy one. 3 times 3 is 9 times 3 is 27. So let's just put 3 in there and see if that works. So we have cube num, two separate functions, this one as a normal function, this one as an arrow function. And again, we could run it from here, and we get 16, 27, or we could run it here and it shows up in our console down here, 16 and 27. So two functions in here. Now, one thing that Brad does in his video is he goes over how to import a function. So let's do that real quick. I'll show you how to import functions into another file. And that way we'll just create another file called index, and we'll put these into kind of a functions file or something like that, or another kind of file. He shows it as an example to import functions in if you don't want to mess up your code too much. So let's do that. Let's rename this, and I'm just going to call it functions. And this will kind of mess up things for a little bit, and then we'll make a new file, and then we'll call one index, and there'll be nothing in there. So now we have that. So now our functions is in here, and our index doesn't have anything in it. And what we'll do here now in our home file is we'll kind of import it in. We'll do something called const, and we'll give it a name. I'll just call it my function right now, and we'll make it be assigned to a node require function. They have a require function, and we could basically send in the file that we want. And actually, it's coming up right now. Now, this is coming up with a file name, so we're going to put a file name in there. I'll just use a single quote, and I'll put a ./, and he shows it using a ./, meaning it's in the same directory. I'm not sure why you couldn't just do a /. We'll try that first, and if it doesn't work, we'll put the dot there. He shows it with dot in front of the /, but we'll use that. And then you basically just have to indicate the file. So I'll put functions, because that's what we're requiring, is kind of like importing. So we're requiring functions, and I'll put the .js. I don't think you have to have the .js, but we'll have that there. Just move this over a little bit, and we'll just put a semicolon here. And then we could use it. Now, before we can use it, we have to export it out of the other file. So we can go here at the end and put module.exports, and I'll just put equals. Now they're showing brackets here. Now if I just did 1, I'm just going to do 1. I'll put square num. I could just do that. I'll just do the 1 export here of square num. So I'm just going to export that function, the square num function, and then we'll see how to do 2. But let's just do that one first. And then I could just go here and we'll do console log, because now we're basically importing that file that the function's coming from. So I'm going to put console log, and in here I'll do my function, and I'll put an argument of 4. So that should be 16. Let's put another one. Let's put 5 so we know it's different. So it's 25. And we'll just put one argument in there and leave it like that. I'll put a semicolon here. So basically, this should be bringing in that one function that we're exporting. Not this one, not the cube. It should just be bringing in the one. So let's see if this works first. I'll check that dot. If we get some errors, that's okay. We'll check it out. Sometimes I like to just mess with it. If I get an error, then I learn from it a little bit more than just following along someone else's code. Let's try it here. Let's try index. Let's try node index. See what happens. And we get an error. Module not found. So that tells me I think we might need the dot here. Let's try the dot and go back and go down here and put node index. Okay, and it's bringing everything in. It brought in 16, 27, and 25. So it's bringing in everything from that previous file. And the thing is, what's happening here, it's bringing 16, 27, 25 because we basically have the console log here. Let's fix that. Let's go back to functions and let's get rid of this stuff here because now it's doing everything it's bringing in from this file. It's running that. So let's just do this and see what happens. See if it does anything with cubenum. Cubenum's not being used right now, so we should just get 25. So I'm actually glad that happened, that it had 3 numbers, but let's try this again. This time I'll just run it. That'll be easier. Okay, we get 25. So it's just using this function. We only have one console log, which is here. So here's our console log. It's using that function. So it's using this variable that's representing the function that's being imported in. Now, another thing, what if you wanted 2 functions to be brought in? Well, you can do that. The only thing you have to do is go here and I think just put these in curly braces and put a comma. So you could do square num, comma, and then do cube num. And it says it's being used right now. Now I didn't finish off the curly brace, so let me do that. So that's the way you could bring in multiple functions if you want to. It's putting a space. I'll leave it like that. That looks cleaner like that. So this isn't showing up gray because it says it's using it because it's being exported. So it's exporting both of these functions now. So if you wanted to keep a file where you had different functions and then you wanted to run them in a file, you could do them here. Now, what does this mean? This just means it's bringing in those different functions. So what do you put here? Do you put the function or you put this name? What you can actually do is put dot and then put the actual function. So I could put square num here and then I can make another one and do my function dot cube num. So that way I'm using them. So again, this variable is just representing, if it was just one function, we could just run this. But since we have 2, we have to kind of break it out now. So now it's going to be my function. And I could also call it this. Maybe this makes more sense. My functions, my functions, my functions. So that now has a name. And I'm doing it different from the functions.js just to keep it different, just so I know that this is my variable here. So I have my functions. It's bringing in any functions in from that file. And now I'm just doing dot and I'm putting the actual function there since now I'm using individual functions. So if I wanted a square 5, that should be 25. And if I wanted cube 5, that's 5 times 5 is 25 times 5 should be 125. I believe, if I know my math. So let's see what this looks like by doing that. And let's see if this works. And let's hit run. And there we go, 25 and 125. Again, just what I was showing here with my index is basically a way to import functions. And you could do that with other languages too. You could do that with Python. But here, what we're doing, since we have 2, we're having a variable that basically represents everything coming in from that file with the dot /, which means current directory. And again, that /, I guess I'm thinking web versus if you work in Linux or Bash console, you have to use this / to mean the current directory and to move up and down directories if you've ever worked with Bash a little bit. So obviously we need that, so we'll stick with doing it that way. And again, 2 functions here. We're just specifying out here with the dot syntax that we're using this function for that one, this function for that one, and we're exporting the 2 functions out of this file here. So again, we don't need any console log here. We're using console log here. Now again, we're just using the basics of Node.js, just the runtime JavaScript language. We're not doing anything that's web-based or web development right now. We're just learning the language a little bit. And you could write files and do different things here and create files. And we're not going to bother even doing that right now because it's not really going to help us. You could learn that with Python. We do that with Python, and we read and write text files and make CSV files and stuff like that. We don't have to do that here. We're just learning a little bit about Node just to start. And for this one, that's all we have to do. So just set it up so that you're importing two functions from a separate file from this functions.js that has basically an arrow function and a regular type function that's returning a value. And we're putting in an argument in the parameter. Here's the parameters here. And then we're putting in an argument when we call the function. We're calling the function through console log, which is showing up in the console, and we can actually run the file through the shell too. So just try doing that as well. Try checking the version, try going in the Node interpreter, type in .exit to get out of that. We'll be using more of that as we work with Node. We'll be doing some installs with Express as we continue. But for now, this is ex10. You could turn this in as just your intro. I know it's not a lot in here, but I like to take this in little small doses just to get used to it. And what we're going to be doing next is working with Express just a little bit, which will be kind of like Flask. So you may enjoy it. It may be more confusing jumping around from some of these. But again, I want to give you a little taste of some of these since, you know, we hear these names thrown around: Node, Express, Bootstrap, and Flask, and all these different things. React, you'll hear React too. He has a React video. All these things you'll hear, I want you to just have an idea of what they do, because before you devote any time to it and invest any time into some of these, you may not be using it a lot. You may not be using Node, just the programming language, for anything else. So just learning basic JavaScript is probably good. The more you learn about basic JavaScript, the more you'll know how to work in Node a little bit, and also the more it'll help you when you start working with the Express framework. So that's ex10. That's all you have to do for that.